Oh yeah, the basket. Hold on a second. Whoops. All right. Tonight's speaker is Mike. Let's welcome Mike to the stage.
My name's Mike Bennett. I'm an alcoholic. It seems appropriate to make sure the basket is going around while I start my talk for a good distraction right off the bat, huh? Not long ago, I told somebody that I was speaking here, maybe last year, and they said they hated speaking here because it was so disruptive and everybody was unruly. And it occurred to me, I wish I'd have said it, but it occurred to me, maybe if you were a better speaker, they would pay attention. So if anybody bothers you about your behavior in future meetings, feel free to use that. I was pretty young when I got sober, and people used to tell me things like, I spilt more than you drank, and I told my sponsor that one time. He said, you should tell them if you'd have drank what you spilt, you might have got here sooner. So, all right, we're still waiting for the basket. I would change that in the format, young man. Huh? Well, I wrote the format. I can say that. I also built this podium 28 years ago in my garage. I did, really. This was my home group forever. So, welcome to the Rarely group. Glad you guys are all here. Really am glad you guys are all here. Hasn't it been horrible trying to be part of AA with no meetings? Hasn't that been miserable? I wasn't worried about people like me and people like some of us who have been sober a while, but think about it if you will. Somebody brand new calls and says, hey, I don't know what to do. What would we normally say to them? Go to a meeting. That's right. Go to a meeting. But you can't do that during the whole COVID thing when all the meetings are shut down. And what would have happened when I called Intergroup all those years ago and said I'd like to go to an AA meeting if they would have said, sorry, I can send you a link to Zoom? That wouldn't have done much for me. One thing I did like about Zoom, though, and somebody mentioned it in a meeting the other day, they were smoking dope while they were on meetings in Zoom. And I thought, well, there's a plus. How would they know? You could black yourself out and attend and not even have to anybody see your eyes, you know. So Marty loved it because he could smoke cigarettes while he was out there. He liked going back to smoking meeting. Anyways, here, give me the basket up here, would you? So I can put money. Thank you. No, you can take it back now. I just want to put money in. We'll just keep it wandering around until I finally catch up with it, I suppose. I got sober January 26, 1992, which makes me 28 years sober. Sober longer than some of you guys have been alive. Doesn't seem like a long time, but it really is a long time to be sober. My sponsor, though, points out regularly that he's been sober 62 years, so he thinks it's nice to see newer people like me staying active. And I'll give him that. We had a speaker last Saturday here from Phoenix who was sober in 92, and I pointed out to her that she didn't get sober till October, and I got sober in January, and I want to make damn sure she was clear on that. So just give that basket to Curtis there, young lady. Congratulations on everybody that got coins, and happy birthday, young man, Raiders fan. 3 years is a long time. Yes, it is. And it's the hardest 3 years to get, I promise you. This is a speaker meeting. Shush. I got sober up in Washington State because I was dodging alimony and child support. I had a wife down here with a new baby, and she wanted my money, and I didn't want to give it to her because I was still drinking and smoking a little weed on the side. So I escaped up to Washington State where nobody knew where I was, and I accidentally got sober while I was up there. And luckily, when I made that phone call to the Intergroup office, they said, well, there's a meeting tonight at 8 o'clock, and told me where it was, and I was so ashamed of myself that I couldn't control. I was 26 years old when I got sober, and I was so ashamed of myself that I had gotten so low that I would consider an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, that I snuck down there. I parked about 2 blocks away from the club, and it was a club very similar to this, had steps on the wall just like this, and there was a desk up front that they would set a podium on when they had somebody standing up. Otherwise, they'd just sit at the desk and lead meetings. And thought it was a very strange thing, Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd never attended a meeting before. But this particular meeting was a birthday night. And for those of you who are new, it was not a regular meeting. All they did was have birthdays. Somebody would come up to the podium and announce that their baby just celebrated a year or 2 years or whatever, and they would come over and say something nice about their sponsor, and their sponsor would say something nice about them. Then they'd go sit down, and the next pair would come up, and this was the whole meeting. They were dressed, the women were dressed in long gowns, and they looked beautiful, like they were going to a big party. And the men were wearing coats and ties, and it was just a really fascinating event to watch. But I didn't have any idea what it had to do with sobriety and what it was going to do to help me. I thought it was strange. And luckily for me, there was a guy in the meeting named Dick D. And Dick said to me, "Why don't you come back tomorrow and I'll meet you here and we're going to have a regular AA meeting." And he helped me understand that that wasn't really what we did here. And I came back the next day and I went to that meeting, and I thought it was just dismal. I really thought it was horrible. It seemed to me that you guys were all a bunch of goody two-shoes who things didn't go quite right for, so you all banded together to do whatever it was you did. You weren't like me, because I was the bad guy. I grew up in South Phoenix, on the streets, in and out of the foster care system from my earliest memory. My very earliest memory was somebody, I don't know who it was, dropping my brother and I off at a home full of people that I didn't know. And I remember, my brother a little older than me, I remember saying to my brother, "What are we doing here and what's going on?" And I was terrified. And he said, "Just stay with me and we'll be okay." And we were there for however long we were there, weeks or whatever. And then parents came and got us and took us home again, and we stayed for a few months. And then they got in trouble, and CPS showed up, Child Protective Services, and they whisked us off again. And this is just the way my whole childhood went. I don't think I was ever with my biological parents for more than, 3, 4, or 5 months at a time. I did not like going to people's homes because I knew I didn't fit in there. I knew I wasn't good enough to be there. But I didn't mind the state facilities. My home was horrible. Your home I didn't fit into. I didn't belong there. But the state facility was fine. I wasn't one of those kids that got molested in there and beat up and all that shit. None of that happened to me. I found my bed. I knew where the kitchen and the bathroom was. And I just did my thing, and the facilities were fine. At 12 years old, I finally got into permanent foster care, and I moved up here from Phoenix. And most wonderful people I ever knew in my life. He was a retired military man, and she was a retired educator, and her expertise was behavioral modification. Now think about that just for a second. The most dysfunctional little boy you can possibly imagine. Have no social skills at all. And this woman takes me in and begins to nurture me and try to help me understand what's wrong with me and help me get along with other people and behave well. And she did a pretty good job when I was just at the house with them. But then they enrolled me in school down in Mayer. And 9 weeks into the 9th grade, I was kicked out of the entire Humboldt school district for violent behavior. Now that sounds better than it is. A violent behavior, that's what was in the document. You think knives and guns and shit, bomb threats. We were just kids fighting, that's all, nothing else. Just little kids wrestling around, fighting a little bit. But it happened so often that they got sick of my ass and they threw me out of the school district. So luckily for me, that happened. I'm the luckiest guy I know in all of my life, I really am. And everybody that I sponsor that knows me well knows that I really believe that. The luckiest person I know. The nice thing about them kicking me out of school is I was able to be homeschooled by this woman who was a fantastic educator. She made sure I was in class at the house, and I stayed there until we had everything we were supposed to do for the day, and then I got to go out on the ranch and do chores and work, and I probably got 10 times the education I would have gotten in the school system. Not because the teachers are inadequate, because I was. And I couldn't have paid attention in the class with all the other students. And the one-on-one attention, nobody had ever really shown me any affection, any real love or nurturing. And when I got with this woman, that's all she did. She did nothing else except just show me affection and nurturing. And she was just the most wonderful woman in the world. And I stayed with her until she died at 87 years old. She was my mom. And he was a wonderful guy. Trained killer, 82nd Airborne paratrooper, 22 and a half years, fought in 2 wars in the Revolution. Just a wonderful man, and I looked up to him like he was God. I mean, he was the guy I wanted to be. He was an atheist, so I became an atheist. I had never been to church anyways. I didn't know anything about God or church or religion except what I'd seen on television, so it was easy for me to just tell people I was an atheist. And see, I've already lost a pair. If I was a better speaker, they would still be here, right? Anyways, so this man was just fantastic. He was the coolest dude I'd ever seen in my whole life. One time we're standing in his driveway. Marty got to know him a little bit before he died, and so did Tom. We're standing in his driveway. He was always armed. I don't know why. Ex-military guy, but he always had a gun on him. This day he didn't have a gun on him. We're standing out in his driveway. We lived way out in the mountains. Just standing there. He had no gun. His brother's standing there. Now he was armed. I'm standing there. I'm not armed. I'm just a little kid. And this guy drives up, this neighbor guy drives up, and he starts threatening him. And he says, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to go to my car, get a gun, and kill you. And all my dad said was, hurry up, I got company. And I'm thinking, now this is the coolest son of a bitch I've ever seen. I don't know what he was going to do, but somehow he was going to kill this guy. You know, I don't know how he was going to do it, like Rambo shit. But I just thought he was awesome. So that's what I wanted to be. When I got about 15, 16 years old, I started drinking. Because I was hanging around with people that lived on these ranches and stuff, and that's what they did. They drank, so I started drinking with them. Now, drinking for me, the first time I ever drank what happened to me was this. I always felt inadequate. I was a weird little kid. I never had any self-esteem. I was a little awkward, because I was at that age. Everybody's awkward. And I just knew I didn't measure up to anybody. And I really probably didn't at that stage of my life and with the past that I had had. But when I drank, about halfway through my second drink, everything came together and it was absolutely perfect. I didn't have to measure up to you anymore. Now you had to measure up to me. Now, if I could drink today and that still happened, you would have a different speaker. I promise you that. Because I would still be doing it. Now, I never drank around those people. I don't know why, except I think, it seems to me, that had I ever drank around them, what happened to me when I started drinking, that they might not have allowed me to stay. And I think subconsciously I was so terrified of not being allowed to be there that I just couldn't drink around them. I couldn't. If they offered me a drink, they never did. But if they did, I'm sure I would have said no, because I think I was so afraid of losing the stability that I had there. It was the only stability that I'd ever had in my life. The only time I'd ever felt love. I didn't even know what that was before then. I really thought life was just about who could outdo everybody else and survive it. That's what I thought it was about. So I always behaved myself around them. But luckily for me, with my drinking, my schoolwork went very, very rapidly, and I accomplished everything she wanted me to accomplish. And I was able to go off and work on these ranches and go into town and work on some construction jobs and stuff. So I was in town a lot over the next few years, and I learned to drink with men. There were no kids around me. I was with men from the time I was 12 years old on. And I learned to drink with them, and I learned to drink like them, and I could drink with them. I really could. I was just as naturally capable of doing that, as all of us are. That doesn't surprise anybody in this room. But the interesting thing is, somewhere along the line, our book talks about we are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. Lost the ability to control our drinking. That implies that at some point we had control of our drinking. And for me, that was true. I've heard speakers say that from their very first drink, they blacked out and drank like that the rest of their life and got divorced, by the time they were 15 twice and, all kinds of shit. I don't know. That wasn't the case for me. There were several years that I could drink and get drunk and party, but if it was important enough to me, I could stop when I needed to stop. But somewhere along there, I lost the ability to do that. That's what our book's talking about. I don't think that it is possible, if you're a non-alcoholic, this is my opinion, and if you don't agree with it, I don't give a shit. I have the microphone. I don't think it's possible to drink enough to become an alcoholic if you are not already built as an alcoholic. I think that I was always an alcoholic in my genetic makeup. When I put alcohol in me, that magical thing that it did for me halfway through my second drink, it does not do for non-alcoholic people. Because of what it did for me, it dictated how I was going to drink from then on. If it would not have done that for me, why would I have put everybody in my life, including me, through all the torture that I did for the next 10 years, 15 years? Why would I have done that? Nobody in their right mind would do that. I was not crazy back then. Alcohol did something so wonderful for me, and I tell non-alcoholic people, if it did for you what it did for me, you would have drank too, and I know they would have. We don't become alcoholic. We either are alcoholic or not. And 6 or 7% of the people in the world have a different genetic makeup. And when we put alcohol in us, it affects us differently. And I know there are some addicts in the room, and I know there's this huge controversy over drug addicts and alcoholism and all this bullshit. And I wouldn't get caught up in it. If you're new and you're struggling with it, I would not get caught up in it. Here's the fact, in my experience. Younger people in today's world can get drugs easier than booze as kids. It gets them where they want to get faster than booze would. Most of them just never drink enough booze to ever get to a point of losing control of it because of what the drugs do for them. Has nothing to do with they're alcoholic or they're not alcoholic. The problem is, we all look the same. You look the same to me. You look the same to you. More importantly, you look the same to the judge and the physician, the people that send you to AA. So you're sent here, and all the old-timers like me are saying, drug addicts, get out. This is for pure alcoholics, which don't really exist. I smoked enough weed to fill about this much of this, right where he is, about that much of this room, in my lifetime, and did a little coke and some speed. Speed wasn't my thing because I'm fast enough already. I didn't need any more help with that. Matter of fact, I don't even drink caffeine in my coffee anymore because I'm just trying to be normal at this stage of my life. But here's the problem. We all look the same. But there is definitely a difference between a drug addict and an alcoholic, and I'm going to tell you what it is. Everybody who takes opiate-based drugs for any length of time in any quantity becomes addicted to it, without exception. Everybody who takes them long enough in enough quantity becomes addicted to them, and they look just like me. And the doctors and the judges send you where? Alcoholics Anonymous, eventually. Maybe prison first. I like this kid. Like the way he thinks. We're not just going to get stoned. We're going to do some shit while we're stoned. Yeah. The problem is this. When the newer people get to AA with that experience, they haven't drank enough to really know whether they're alcoholic. I've worked with so many people over the last 28 years that say, I don't know if I'm even an alcoholic. But everybody tells me to go to AA and say I'm an alcoholic. Well, I don't give a shit what you say in an AA meeting. I remember calling New York General Service Office one time. I was 4 or 5 years sober, and I was on that bandwagon, that anti-addict bandwagon. And I called New York, and I wanted to get some ammunition to tell you what New York said, like you would give a shit. And New York said, there's nothing anywhere in our literature anywhere that says you have to introduce yourself anyway. There's nothing that says you have to say, my name is Mike Bennett, and I'm an alcoholic. You could just say, my name is Mike. Ain't nothing anybody can say about anything. So it's really, basically what they're saying, why don't you mind your own business? I loved that when I was newer. So then I called an old-time AA'er, Dr. Paul. His story is in the 3rd edition of the Big Book, if you're interested. It's called Dr. Alcoholic Addict. Gives a great AA talk. Talks about sticking needles in his arms to try to offset his booze use and drug combination so he can get to his bedroom before he passes out, and sometimes he makes it to the hallway, and sometimes he overdoes it and just right in his car he sleeps. But he always talks about alcoholism. That's all he talks about. So it seemed to me that I could get Dr. Paul to give me some ammunition, so I tried to force my opinion on him and get him to say what I wanted him to say to me. And he kept kind of going around the other direction, and I'd say more to him. He'd go around the other direction, I'd say more. And finally he said, God damn it, why don't you mind your own goddamn business? And he hung up on me. And I thought, well, I don't like him. So finally, around 10 years sober, one of my children got addicted to heroin. That'll change your perspective if you're a father in AA. At least it did mine. And I wondered, where am I going to send my son? He didn't have a drinking problem. He was 16 years old. He hadn't lived long enough to have a drinking problem. I mean, he hadn't drank enough. Some guys do drink enough at that stage, but he hadn't. Where am I going to send him? AA is anti-heroin addict. They're anti-speed freaks. They're anti-meth heads or crack, whatever you guys are. I don't know. Those things. So I decided I'm going to take him to an AA meeting. I said, don't talk. and for God's sake, don't say heroin. You'll make me look bad. So I took him to some AA meetings. And he didn't identify. He was too young. He hadn't drank any. He just didn't identify. So eventually I got him to go to some other meetings, and he didn't stay clean. He kept going down the road he was going, and about 18 or 19 years old, it got so bad for him, he finally went into a treatment center. And they helped him start to understand what was wrong with him. And then he went back to his life, and it got better, and then it got worse. And he went to another treatment center. Today, my son is married, has 2 children, has not touched a drug in 7 or 8 years, and drinks normally. That's not possible. If you've been in treatment, they will tell you it's not possible. Bullshit. He drinks normally. And let me tell you why. He's not an alcoholic. I work with a man right now who's given me the freedom to talk about he was in AA actively sponsoring people, and some of you guys here that have been around a while knew him. And he was sober 10 years, took a 10-year coin and quit going to meetings, like a lot of us do at some stage of our sobriety. And then it started occurring to him after a little while, maybe I'm not an alcoholic. My problem really was meth. They just sent me to AA. Maybe I'm not really an alcoholic. And eventually he experimented a little bit. Marty knows him very well, sees him almost every day. Eventually he experimented with a little drinking. Nothing bad happened. It's been 10 years he's been doing that, and nothing bad has ever happened. You know why? He's not an alcoholic. The problem is we look the same. We don't know. So if I was you and you're not sure, stick around. What the hell you got to lose? And if you decide you think you might not be an alcoholic, it's okay to go do try some controlled drinking, isn't it? The only instructions in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous say this: if you're not thoroughly convinced, step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. That's what the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says. Now, you might have to try it more than once. It might ruin your life again. Who knows? But eventually, if you ever become absolutely convinced without any reservation that I am alcoholic, then we can help you. There's nothing we can do until then. That was the story of my life. I drank and used dope and drank and used dope until I drank up one marriage and a kid. I was running from my alimony and child support, and I did it again. Drank up half of another marriage. I sobered up the other half of it, but I drank up half of another marriage. She was getting ready to leave me because she had a baby. Women are funny when they have babies. They don't like alcoholic, deadbeat men in their lives, and I was that. I remember listening to a speaker one time who said, at the podium, he said, I've had 27 jobs. He was like 30 years old. I've had 27 jobs in my life before I got sober. And I thought, what a loser. I had a lot of jobs. This man's a quitter for sure. The next day I'm sitting at work and I get a legal pad out and I thought, how many jobs have I had? I don't have any idea. And I'm not talking about part-time work and weekend jobs. I'm talking about jobs where I got a W-2. I wrote down on this legal pad, I work here. Before here, I worked there. Before there, I worked there. And I kept writing. Second page, I kept writing. Then I thought, shit. So I numbered them. I got down to the end and I just shook my head. I couldn't even believe it. You couldn't even guess how many jobs. I was 26 years old when I got sober, and I had 52 jobs. Now, I'm a quitter. I get that thing. One thing I never did when they talk about all these different experiments we did, try scotch or try whatever they do, that whole list of things in the big book. One of it says, take a trip, not take a trip. I never tried not taking a trip. I was a trip-taking son of a bitch, boy. When the heat was on, I was gone. And I took trips from work. I quit jobs. I just walked off. Sometimes they didn't even know that I had quit. A lot of jobs didn't even know I quit. They couldn't find me anymore. And eventually a check would show up in my mailbox because I just went home. I did that on a horse one time. I rode all the way to Mayer from 10 miles out in the mountains, and he was tied up in front of the bar when they found me. I didn't even quit. I just left them. They were all over there doing what they were doing. I just rode to town. I was thirsty. Luckily, my boss was an alcoholic. He came in, found me, bought me some drinks, and then we loaded my horse in his horse trailer, and we went back to the ranch, and I was still working there. I don't know how that happened, but I wound up quitting that job eventually. So I was a quitter. That's the way my life was. Now let me tell you what happened though. After that first marriage, or right before that first marriage ended, I quit drinking forever because she threatened to divorce me if I didn't quit drinking. Now I'm going to tell you, I wanted to be a good dad. I really wanted to be that. I wanted to be a good husband. I wanted to be a good employee. I wanted to be a good brother, a good son. I wanted to be all of those things that I was good, but I was not capable of doing that for one reason. When I drank, no matter how bad that was, I felt better. When I tried doing that, I did not feel good. I felt bad. I felt out of place, out of control, inadequate. And when I drank, I felt better. The longer I stayed sober, the worse I got. If you think stopping drinking is the cure for alcoholism, you're in for a painful discovery if you're like me. The longer I stayed sober, the worse I got. Eventually, it would become absolutely necessary for me to drink. It was the only way I could turn the voices off. It's the only way I could get any peace of mind. I remember a speaker saying one time, never experienced serenity before I came to AA. And I'm sitting in the audience right there, and I thought to myself, well, I sure as hell did about halfway through my second drink. I could make serenity happen on cue. I experienced it every time I drank. And if I could still do it today, I promise you to have a different speaker today. But I quit drinking forever so I could save that marriage, and I couldn't save the marriage because I couldn't stay sober. And I finally had to drink again. It starts out like this for me. I quit drinking. That's pretty good because I don't throw up the day after tomorrow. I start to eat a little bit. I start to sleep regularly. Physically, I start to clean up. I start to feel like a normal person again. But after a little bit of time, I don't know how long, a week or two, I start to get a little irritable. Just a little irritable. And then I start to have constant anxiety. And then fear sets in. And I start getting paranoid that people are talking about me and they don't like me and I'm not measuring up again. And then it turns into anger. And after a while, it is flat out rage. That's what happens to me when I stop drinking. So I'm either going to kill me or you, or I'm going to drink again. So I would always drink again. The next marriage, or in between marriages, I got in some trouble and quit drinking again. The next marriage, I got in some trouble, I quit drinking again. That's what kept happening to me. And the length of time I could stay sober before that happened to me kept getting shorter. The last time I was sober for a month, and I was stark raving sober. I was so crazy that I couldn't stand it anymore. And I had to drink, and I didn't know what to do after that. And the second wife and baby was getting ready to leave. Matter of fact, she had just had a baby. It was Christmas Day. She had just had a baby, and I toasted with some champagne and quit drinking forever. And I asked her if she wanted champagne. She just had a baby. She said no, so I drank the whole bottle because I'm not going to overreact. Let's not waste booze. But then I was done. I drank that bottle. I was done. I was never going to drink again. And 30 days later, I had an opportunity to drink, and I didn't even think about it. Marty and I talk about the blinders that go on. I didn't even put any thought into it. I just drank, and I got drunk that day. And then I thought something's got to change because I can't keep doing it. I can't keep doing it like I'm doing it. I either have got to kill me or I've got to stop drinking because I can't do this anymore. And so I made a resolve to stop drinking. I called somebody I knew in AA. Didn't know anything about AA at that point, but I called somebody I knew in AA, and he showed up at my house. And it seemed like this. Have you ever made that call and then knew that you overreacted immediately and you wish you hadn't have? I'm on the phone. I call him. Hey, Lindsay, I think I might have a drinking problem. Hang on a second. I answer the door. There's Lindsay. How the hell did that happen? Now, I am quite sure that didn't happen, but that's the way it felt to me. How did that son of a bitch get here so fast? And he's standing there with the big book in his hand, and he starts beating me over the head with it, like, AAs do. And I got rid of him as damn quick as I could because I knew that I had made a bad mistake here. Matter of fact, I think he put his sister on the phone from Texas to beat me over the head with her big book too. So I got rid of him, and I thought, shit, I'm never doing that again. So I just decided I was going to stay stopped on my own. I made it 4 months. And I almost remember thinking that day that I threw him out of my house, I'm going to keep AA up my sleeve like an ace. And if I ever need it, it'll be there. But for now, I'm just going to not drink. And I made it 4 months. And I was on the edge of drinking, killing myself, or trying AA. And I decided I was going to try AA. And that's when I made that phone call. That lady answered the phone and told me where the meeting was. And I went to that meeting. Now, that second meeting I was at, I told you about earlier, it was a crappy meeting. I don't know what it was. I couldn't hear anything. My mind was spinning around so much. And it was going around this room. And if you go to these meetings where it just goes around the room, I'm going to tell you what happens, and it happens to all of us. While it's going around the room, you're thinking about, or I do, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say when it gets to me. So I don't hear anything. Then it gets to me, and I say what I say. And then I spend the rest of the meeting thinking about what I wish I would have said. And I've never heard a damn thing. That's the way this meeting felt like to me. And I think I still feel that way I'm sitting in those meetings. Because I don't listen any better than you guys do. But the third meeting, let me tell you about the third meeting. The third meeting, there was this old timer in there, he's 20 years sober, and he wasn't talking to me, he was just talking. But he said, if your problem's drinking, stop drinking, and your life should get better. When that basket comes around, throw a couple dollars in there, and you should tap dancing down the road a happy man. But when you quit drinking, if your life gets worse, maybe we can help you. And that was the first time in my life anybody ever said anything that I thought might know what's wrong with me. Maybe this guy knows what's wrong with me. Now, I'd like to tell you I became a good AA member right then. And I stood up and I went to the front and I was saved. And Mickey put his hands on me and healed me and all that shit. But I was in the back of the room. And I didn't stand up and hold hands with you guys and do your prayers. I didn't do any of that hokey bullshit because I thought it was all fairy tale Girl Scout kind of crap. So as soon as you guys circled and started that, I left. Well, Mickey caught me before I got to my car, my first sponsor, and he said, do you have a sponsor? I said, no. He said, good, I'm going to be your sponsor till you can find one that suits you better. But there's some things you're going to have to do. I said, okay. I had never been to AA before. I didn't know there were rules, or there were no rules. If you're new, you can stay here doing nothing until you die, and we'll let you. I didn't know that when I was new. And I wasn't done being here yet, so he said, there's some things you're going to have to do. I said, okay. He said, can you follow directions? And I lied and said, yes. Then he said, do you believe in God? And that was almost a deal breaker for me. I said, no, and if I have to for this to work, it won't work for me. He said, are you willing to believe in God if I can prove it to you? And I said, sure, but you won't. He said, great. That's all we need, kid, just willingness. And he got all excited about that. And I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard in my whole life. I wasn't willing. I was trying to get him to quit talking about God. That was all. But he was such a good AA. Best AA I ever knew. I swear to God, and I've known a lot of AAs in the last 28 years I've been sober. Best AA I ever knew. He never jacked with me about it again. At one stage, when we first started the steps, we got to step 3, and he said, would you kneel down on the floor with me and say the third step prayer? And I said, no. Pissed me off, too. Because I had already told him, and I'm not going to tell him twice. I don't do that shit. I don't believe in it. I'm an atheist. I don't do it. And he said, would you at least read the prayer out of the book? I said, why? Because you agreed to follow directions, and that's the directions. Whether you believe it or not, would you just read it? I said, I'll read the goddamn thing. So I open it, I read it just with gritted teeth, and when I'm done, I slam the book shut, and I said, there, it didn't do anything for me. And he said, fine, let's just move on. Best AA I ever knew. If he would have tried to convince me I had to believe in God to get sober and stay sober, he would have killed me. I didn't have to believe in God. All I had to do was be willing to take the rest of the steps. That's all I had to be willing to do. So he wrote out how I was to write my inventory and said, come back here next Saturday and have your inventory done. And I did, and we got through my inventory, and I was driving home after that. And I had this feeling come over me that I did not recognize. I used to say, when I was newer, I used to say I had this spiritual awakening. I really don't think that's what it was at all. But it was so foreign to me, it seemed that way. It just seemed so big. Guess what that feeling was? I felt good. The only time that I could ever remember in my whole life feeling good about me, sober, I felt good. Nothing spectacular, I just felt good. And it occurred to me as I'm driving home, for me to feel this good, maybe there's something to this God thing. Now, that ain't a lot, is it? And if you're raised in religion, it seems almost sacrilegious to say that's all it was. But for a guy like me to think, maybe there's something to this God thing, that is a miracle, an absolute miracle for a guy like me. Now, from that moment on, I started my search for God. For the next 15, 16 years, all I did was read religious literature. I read every book AA has ever published, except one. A man I sponsor brought me a book the other day I've never read. And it's actually not an AA book, so it doesn't count. So it's about an AA guy, but it's not really an AA publication. I read every AA publication there was. And I studied. Nice thing about not being raised in church, I could study Judaism, and I wasn't committing blasphemy, according to the Christian. I could study Christianity, and I wasn't committing blasphemy to the Jews. And I could study Mormonism, and I could study Buddhism. I could study all these religions with freedom because I was nothing. So anything I studied, I was a good boy doing the right thing. So I read about all these religions for 15 years. At the end of 15 years, I was so exhausted. Are you guys watching a movie back there? We have got to get a better speaker, boys. It's like more people are going to that corner. Is it a football game? There's something going on back there. Exciting. Anyways, so I don't know what you're pointing at. So, oh, okay. So what was I talking about? Oh, I'm studying religion for 15 years. So at the end of it, I'm exhausted. How many people have not seen Forrest Gump? Like everybody has seen Forrest Gump, right? So Forrest, he's confused about his life. So he runs across the United States. He's still confused, so he runs back. He's still confused. He runs back. I don't know how many times he did it. But one day he got tired, and he stopped running. I had 15 years of running back and forth through religion, trying to find my God and my place in this world, and I got tired. And I realized I don't know a damn bit more now than I knew when I started about God. I know a lot about history. I know a lot about religion. I know a lot about AA's history. I don't know a damn bit more about God than I knew when I started. So I just gave up and I said something like this. I don't know what it was. I don't even know if it was structured this way, but I said something like that, like this. I have no idea who you are and who you're supposed to be to me, but I'm tired of looking. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be the best AA member I can be. And I'd already been trying to do that, but I'm going to be the best AA member I can be. And if I'm supposed to know you, I'm going to let you show me. Adios. And I went to work just being a good AA, continuing to be a good AA, best AA I could be. About 3 years later, I'm not doing anything spectacular. I'm just going through my day, being AA, doing stuff. And I had this awareness that came over me. It was just like I knew something that I had always known. I just didn't know I knew it. Just all of a sudden, I just realized what I knew all along. And it was this connection to this higher power. Now, if you're new, that should give you hope. Only 18 years of sobriety, and it happened for me. That'll give you hope. Some of you guys are, I don't know, better than me, so maybe it'll happen sooner. But anyways, now I had enough. I had enough to stay here and stay trying to be a good AA and feeling good about my life, but I didn't have that personal God to me. 18 years, I finally had that personal God to me, and I didn't do anything to make it happen. It just happened on its own. I think I had finally surrendered at a deep enough level to allow the knowledge I always had to come out to the surface so I could become aware of it. Aware of something I always knew. That's the way it felt to me. All of my existence and the lives before this, I always knew this. I just couldn't see it. Now I could see it. Now, the interesting thing about that, for a guy like me, everybody was out to get me. Life was against me. Everything was a battle. Everything was a fight. Now, here I am in AA where it's all about love, and it's about compassion, and it's about thoughtfulness of others and giving of yourself, and all of the things that we aspire to become here, those of us who are serious about trying to change our lives. I'm about 3 years past this experience, so I'm feeling like it's pretty real. It hasn't faded any. If anything, it has grown in its strength and my awareness of what it is. My youngest son, who was born on that Christmas day that I told you about so many years before, he was going to college, 22 years old, greatest kid you ever knew in your life, greatest kid you ever met in your life. When he'd come to my house, he'd walk in my house, he'd kiss me on my head. If I'm sitting in my chair, he'd kiss me on my head, and he'd go steal my food. Then he'd leave, and he'd kiss me on my head when he left, and then he'd come back with his filthy laundry and throw it in the laundry room so his mother could wash it, and he'd kiss me on my head when he left. And he'd just do that all day long. And finally I'm saying, God damn it, leave me alone. Quit it. He thought it was hilarious. He just loved kissing his daddy. And that boy loved me as much as any kid has ever loved any dad any time in the history of mankind, I promise you. He's going to college, South Alabama. And we were living out there at the time. He started dating this woman, first girlfriend he ever had in his life. We thought he was gay. I really did think he was gay. I even told him, I'm sure you're gay. He said, no, I'm not gay. I said, it's okay if you're gay. I love you. He said, I'm not gay, goddammit. But anyways, so he gets this girlfriend, and she's a beautiful girl, and they're going to school together, and they're studying creative writing, and then they have second majors, and his was math because he wanted to become an actuary for an insurance company because they make $150,000 starting out, and that's why he wanted to make money. I like that boy. Anyways, so they're dating, and he posts on Facebook that he's in a relationship with this woman. The next day, her ex shows up at the college dorm and kills both of them. Shot her 8 times, shot him 5 times to death, and then the boy turns the gun on himself and shoots himself. Now, I'm about 6 hours from home, traveling in the work I was doing at the time. I get this call from his older brother, and they were like twins. They were just glued together their whole lives. He calls me, and he said, Gus was just shot and killed. He tells me the story. And I said, I'll be home as soon as I can. I got a 6-hour drive, so I'm driving about 115, trying to get my ass home. Just, I don't know what to do. You know, it's just this whole thing of emotions you could imagine. But I knew instantly, and I swear to you, I knew instantly he was okay. I knew he was with God because I trusted God, and God loved me, and God loved you, and God loved him. I knew that instantly he was okay, but it occurred to me, this is going to be hard for me. I wasn't done playing with him yet. I wasn't done watching him become whatever he was going to become. I loved this boy as much as any dad loved any boy ever. And we had such a good, solid relationship. I knew he was okay, but I knew my wife was going to have a terrible time. I knew I was going to have a terrible time. Our other 3 children and all of our grandchildren. I knew this was going to be hard for our family. Called my sponsor immediately, Clancy. Some of you have heard of Clancy. He's over in Los Angeles. He's 62 years sober now. My first sponsor died when I was 12 years sober. It was still the greatest AA I ever knew. I called Clancy, and I told Clancy what was going on, and he said, well, God bless you. And he said, talk to me about a few things. And then he gave me the best advice anybody could ever give anybody in the history of mankind. He said, listen, Mike, don't you become a victim, goddammit. And he hung up the phone. Best advice anybody ever gave anybody ever. Because think about how easy it would be to become a victim. Poor me. Nobody killed me. Nothing happened to me. My life is going on, and this is a part of my life. His life ended. That was his life. I don't think God cares if we live to be 120. I don't think God cares if we die when we're very young or anywhere in between. I think God cares about one thing. What did you learn while you were there? And I think what I learn here determines where I get to go next. I think of life as this I think of the spiritual realm, or the eternal existence, if you will, as a series of classrooms. This is that awakening that I came to. A series of classrooms. I'm in a class, and whatever I learn here will determine what class I get to go to next. Now, if I really screw this up, which I could, Daryl and I had a great meeting this morning. We were talking about the difference between all of you people, whether you've had an easy time in sobriety or a horrible time. The difference in all of us is, or somebody drinking and struggling, and a guy like me that stayed sober a long time, the difference in all of us is one drink. I could have one drink, and everything in my life could shift and change, and it could go a totally different direction, and I could screw up this class. There's no question in my mind I could. And I might screw it up, get bad enough to get held back and have to do this summit again. I don't know. It could happen. Who knows? Anyways, I think of it as a series of classrooms. Whatever I learn here helps them decide where I get to go next and what I get to learn next. I believe Gus is fine because, that's his name, Gus. I believe Gus was fine because he was the most loving person I knew, the most caring person I knew. And I just have to believe that God loves him enough that he moved on to another classroom and he's doing fine. And maybe someday I'll see him. I don't know. I'm kind of pissed off he got to go before me because I'm the big shot. I'm supposed to go next and set the example. But I promise you that it didn't rock my faith. Not 1 ounce. It didn't rock my faith because of what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. 3 or 4 days after it happened, we had a service at my house. Everybody in AA in southern Alabama was jam-packed in my house. There were hundreds of people there because everybody knew me. I was very active like I am here. And a lot of people knew Gus because, we did family functions together all the time. They were just jammed in there. You couldn't even move because there were so many people, just the love that came out of that. That afternoon, I had to leave my house with all of those people in there, family and friends from AA, neighbors. And I had to leave my daughter in charge because we had to go to the girlfriend's service that afternoon. Now, I'm sitting in that church, and I'm about 3-4 rows back on that side. The mother of this young woman was sitting in the front row on that side, and somebody next to me bumps me and says, "Do you know who that is?" I said, "No, I assume it's her mother." She said, "Yeah, it's her mother. Have you heard her story?" And I said, "No." 5 years ago, her oldest daughter was killed in a car accident. 4 years ago, her son died of an overdose. 3 years ago, her other son was killed in a drug-related shooting. Last year, another daughter was killed, don't know how, and now she's lost her last daughter. And this was a good one. This one that didn't drink, didn't do drugs, nothing. She was in college doing everything on scholarship. She was just a great girl. She lost that one. I remember sitting there thinking how lucky I am. I'm the luckiest guy I know. How lucky I am that I only lost one child in my life. Could you even imagine? Could you even imagine what that woman went through? The next day, they had a service for the boy who committed the crime. I wanted to set a good example for my family because of what you taught me in AA, and I dressed all my children up, and my wife and I did, and we loaded up in our car, and we went to that service too to support that family. Could you imagine being the family whose kid did it? Bad enough to be the family who had it done too, but imagine being the mother and the father of the kid who went and killed those other kids. Could you even imagine? So we went to support them. Greatest move I ever made in my whole life. You know why? Because it's love. That's true love. I learned that in here. That's what you guys taught me in AA. You guys taught me that the only thing I have to do in this class, in this life, if you will, is to learn to love and to love unconditionally. Everybody who knows me at all knows that this is my motto in life, to forgive everyone for everything, every single time, without exception. Thank you, and I love you all.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike.